She said it was just another business trip. I kissed her goodbye like I always did, never knowing that her suitcase held more than clothes. It carried a secret that would tear my world apart. I remember the way her suitcase sat by the door, perfectly packed, zipped up, standing tall like it had nothing to hide. Rachel was checking her phone again, fingers flying across the screen, probably confirming her hotel check-in or texting a coworker. I didn't think much of it then. Why would I? She had always been organized, on top of things, efficient, the kind of person who made lists even for weekend trips. "It's just 3 days," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice was calm, practiced. "I'll call you from the hotel tonight, promise." I smiled and nodded, trying not to show how much I hated when she traveled. I never told her that. Didn't want to seem clingy. I always told myself this was part of being married to someone ambitious, someone building a career, taking steps forward. I admired that about her. At least I used to. "Be safe," I said, wrapping my arms around her. She felt warm, but for some reason a little stiff. Maybe it was the early hour, maybe I imagined it. "Of course," she replied, pulling back just enough to give me a quick kiss on the lips. "I'll miss you." And then she was gone. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and I stood there in the quiet hallway, listening to the sound of her wheels dragging across the concrete outside. That part always stung a little more than I liked to admit. I made coffee, fed the dog, the usual routine. I kept checking my phone that morning without meaning to, not waiting for anything specific, just expecting something, a text, an emoji, something small and dumb that would say, "Hey, I'm thinking about you." But it never came. Still, I brushed it off, told myself she was probably just busy. Meetings, airports, work stress. It's strange how the smallest things can feel loud when your life is still whole. You don't recognize them as warnings, just noise, background hum. That morning, I had no idea that this trip would be different, that this goodbye would mark the beginning of something unraveling. And yet, somewhere deep in my chest, I felt it. A flicker, a whisper, something not quite right. But I turned away from it and went on with my day. The first night without her was always the hardest. The house just felt hollow, quiet in a way I never quite got used to, no matter how many work trips she went on. I'd leave the TV on just for background noise, flipping through channels without really watching anything. I texted her around 8. "How's the hotel? Long day." No reply. At 9:30, I texted again. "All good." Still nothing. Now I'm not the jealous type. At least I never thought I was. We'd been married 6 years, and while things weren't perfect, I trusted her. But something about the silence that night felt unfamiliar. Rachel was usually good about texting, especially on trips. She knew how I got overthinking things, getting in my head too much. So I tried to distract myself, watched a movie, fed the dog again even though she wasn't hungry. By 11:15, I was lying in bed, phone on the charger, screen dark. That's when a thought hit me, completely uninvited. What if she's not alone? I sat up in bed, heart racing like I'd been running. Where did that even come from? Guilt washed over me just for thinking it. Rachel wasn't like that, she'd never. My phone buzzed, finally. "Sorry babe, long day, crashed early. Hotel's fine, talk tomorrow, love you." I stared at it for a long time. I wanted to believe it. I really did. But something felt off, not in the words themselves, they were the right ones, it was the timing. The rhythm, like she had remembered she was supposed to be someone's wife. The next day, the texts were normal. A photo of her hotel room. A blurry shot of a salad with a joke about conference food. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Like a painting you've seen 100 times but suddenly notice is tilted ever so slightly. Each night that followed, I slept a little less. I kept looking at her messages longer than I needed to. I reread them like they were puzzles, searching for something I couldn't name. And that whisper in my chest, it had grown into a quiet, aching hum. I didn't have proof. Just instinct. But sometimes, instinct is louder than evidence. She came back on a Sunday evening. The wheels of her suitcase rattled up the walkway just like always. I opened the door before she could knock. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give a stranger at the store, polite, practiced. "Hey you," she said. "Welcome home," I replied, stepping aside. I wanted to hug her, but her arms were full. She walked past me, her scent trailing behind, a new perfume, lighter than usual. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. I told myself I was overthinking again. She talked about the trip while unpacking. Meetings that ran late, boring dinners, awkward small talk with clients. It was everything I'd expect to hear, but it all felt like a script, like she had rehearsed it. I nodded in all the right places, asked follow-up questions. She answered quickly, easily, too easily. At dinner, she barely touched her food, said she was tired. I told her she should get some rest, and she didn't argue. That surprised me. Usually she'd want to curl up on the couch with a glass of wine, watch something, catch up on our week apart, but not this time. When she went to bed early, I stayed downstairs. I sat in the dark with the TV on mute, staring at her empty wine glass on the kitchen counter. The air felt heavy. The next few days didn't bring back the rhythm we used to have. Conversations were short. Eye contact was rare. She smiled at all the right times, but her laugh, I realized, hadn't returned with her. Not the real one, anyway. I tried to shake it. Told myself maybe work had drained her. Maybe she was just overwhelmed, but deep down I knew something had changed. It wasn't in what she said, it was in the spaces between the words, the silences, the pauses. One evening, I brought up how quiet she'd been. She looked at me, eyes tired. "I'm just worn out, that's all." I nodded, but I didn't believe her. And I think she knew I didn't. That night, when she was asleep, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when exactly I had stopped feeling like her husband, and started feeling like a stranger watching her from across a widening gap. It started with a ding. Just a regular afternoon. I was at my laptop trying to focus on some billing issues for a client. I hadn't even noticed that Rachel had left her email logged into the shared family tablet. Normally, I wouldn't touch her inbox. I respected her privacy. But the notification popped up so suddenly, and something about the subject line made me freeze. Ray expense report attached, copy for approval. It was from her company's finance department. I don't even know why I opened it. Maybe I told myself I was just checking for anything urgent. Maybe I was looking for something, even if I didn't want to admit it. Inside was a PDF attachment, just 3 pages. I hesitated for a full minute before I tapped it open. At first, everything looked normal. A few cab rides, meals, standard stuff. But then I saw it, a hotel name I didn't recognize. The Larkwood Inn. I frowned. That wasn't the place she told me she was staying. I remembered her saying it was the Marriott downtown. She even mentioned the breakfast buffet she missed. But this hotel? I'd never heard of it. I looked it up. It wasn't even in the same city she said the conference was in. I reread the hotel name 3 times, my heart pounding harder each time. Then I saw another charge. A dinner receipt, 2 entrees, a bottle of wine. The timestamp read 9:43 p.m. That was the night she told me she'd crashed early. Something in my stomach turned cold. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she switched hotels last minute. Maybe she went to dinner with a coworker. I kept trying to fill in the blanks with innocent reasons. But they weren't landing like they used to. I scrolled back through our messages from that night. Her text had come just minutes after that dinner bill. "Sorry babe, long day, crashed early." That one line suddenly felt like a lie carved into stone. I closed the tablet, just sat there in silence. The walls around me felt too close, too still, like the whole house was waiting to hear what I'd do next. I didn't confront her. Not yet. But something had shifted. And once suspicion finds evidence, it stops being suspicion. It becomes something else entirely. I couldn't stop thinking about the hotel. That night after Rachel fell asleep, I lay awake, the ceiling above me fading into darkness. I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I knew more. So I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and went downstairs with the tablet. I pulled up the expense report again. The hotel name stared back at me like a bruise that had finally surfaced. I opened a map and typed it in. The Larkwood Inn. It was almost 2 hours away from where her supposed conference had been. A quiet place in a small coastal town, not a business district, not near any office buildings or convention centers. It looked romantic. That word hit me harder than I expected. I started checking dates. Every receipt in the report lined up with the days she was away for work. But none of the locations made sense. Spa charges, a room service dessert order at midnight. Another dinner for two. Who was the second person? I tried to tell myself it could be anything. Maybe her coworker, maybe a client, maybe. But I couldn't lie to myself anymore. The dots weren't just lining up, they were shouting. A trip she lied about. A hotel she never mentioned. Meals for two. The late replies. The weird distance when she got back. The new perfume. The forced smiles. It was all there, like a puzzle I didn't want to finish but couldn't stop solving. I went further. Checked her shared calendar. Nothing listed for the trip. No reminders. No blocked-off meetings like she usually had. I opened her photo gallery. Nothing from the hotel. Not one picture. Not one selfie, which she always took even when she hated how she looked. Just a gap like those days didn't exist. By the time the sun started to rise, I was still sitting there, cold coffee beside me, heart hollowed out. She had lied. Not just once, not just in passing. She had constructed an entire trip, wrapped in details, layered with fake check-ins and bedtime texts, all to cover up something she didn't want me to see. And the worst part, I still didn't know who he was. But I knew he existed. And that knowledge sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. I waited until the evening. All day I carried the weight of it, her lies, the receipts, the hotel name echoing in my head like a bell I couldn't unring. My hands felt clumsy, my mouth dry. I barely spoke to her that morning. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she was pretending not to. That night after dinner, she was scrolling through her phone on the couch, feet tucked under a blanket, like nothing had changed. Like everything wasn't about to. "Hey," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "Can we talk?" She looked up slowly. "Sure, what's up?" I sat across from her, elbows on my knees. My heart was pounding, but I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to explode. I wanted the truth, just the truth. "I saw your expense report." Her face didn't change immediately. She blinked once slowly, then set her phone down. "You were in Larkwood," I said, "not at a conference." A beat of silence stretched between us, sharp and electric. She looked down, eyes scanning the rug like it might hold an escape route. "Ethan," she started, but her voice cracked. I swallowed hard. Who is he? That question broke whatever was left of her composure. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time in years she looked small. Not composed, not in control, just a woman caught in something too big for her to spin. "His name is Daniel," she said, barely above a whisper. "He's someone I met through work, a supplier." I felt my face flush, heat and nausea rising all at once. "How long?" "A few months," she said. "It wasn't supposed to be anything, it just happened." I stood up pacing, my hands were shaking. "You lied to me. You looked me in the eye before you left and you lied." "I know," she said. Tears were in her eyes now. "I didn't plan to. I didn't mean for it to become what it did." I laughed, short, bitter. "You mean a weekend getaway with spa charges and room service for two?" She didn't respond. She couldn't. The room felt too quiet after that. Just her breathing, shallow and guilty. "I just wanted to feel something different," she finally said, voice trembling. "It wasn't about him, it was about me." I looked at her then, really looked, and saw the distance between us wasn't new. It had been growing quietly while we both looked away. And now, we were on opposite sides of a truth we could never unhear. The next morning, the house felt like it belonged to strangers. Rachel had stayed in the guest room. I heard her crying through the wall after I shut our bedroom door. I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything and nothing at the same time. There's a strange kind of silence that follows the truth. It's not peaceful, it's sharp. Every sound felt exaggerated. The clink of a spoon in the sink, the tick of the clock, the wind tapping against the window like it wanted in on the wreckage. She didn't say anything when we crossed paths in the hallway, just nodded. I didn't speak either. What was there to say? That I was devastated, that I couldn't look at her without seeing that damn hotel name burned into the space between us. I went through the motions. Work, coffee, walks with the dog, but nothing felt real. Like I was just playing a role while everything inside me screamed for answers, for a way out of the pain. Every corner of the house reminded me of us, the us before I knew. I checked her phone. I won't lie about that. I waited until she was in the shower and my hands were shaking the whole time. But there weren't any messages from Daniel, no photos, no calls. Either she deleted everything or maybe the affair had ended already. It didn't matter. The damage was done. The doubt had already rooted itself deep. I started questioning everything. Was it the first time? How many trips had she lied about? Was our life just a carefully constructed performance I believed in because I wanted to? But even more painful than the betrayal was the realization that I hadn't noticed it happening. That somewhere along the line, we had drifted, and I'd been too distracted or too trusting to see the cracks forming. I didn't confront her again that day or the next. We existed like roommates, moving around each other, careful not to touch too much, speak too much, feel too much. It was like grief, but worse. Because grief has a reason. This was just absence. She was here, and yet I had never felt more alone. Days bled into weeks, but the house never felt whole again. Every morning I woke up staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. Rachel and I were like two sides of a coin that had been flipped and lost in the air, spinning, uncertain, with no way to know where it would land. I wanted to fix things. I wanted us to go back to how it was, or at least to something better. But the truth was tangled, sharp, and tangled some more. Trust wasn't just broken, it was shattered. One evening I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a photo of us on our wedding day. Her eyes were red. I wanted to reach out, but the space between us felt too wide. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I'm sorry for everything." I swallowed hard. "I don't even know if I can forgive you." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know." For the first time since everything exploded, I let myself be honest with her, but mostly with myself. I felt angry, hurt, betrayed beyond words. But beneath it all was something quieter, grief for the life we lost and fear of what the future might bring. Could I forgive her? Could I forgive myself for trusting blindly? I thought about the years we'd spent building a life together, the laughter, the fights, the dreams whispered late at night. It wasn't just about Rachel. It was about me too, about whether I was willing to fight for what we had left or if I needed to walk away. That night I made a choice. Not an easy one. Not a clear one. But a choice. I told her I needed time, space, to figure out what trust looked like after it was broken. She nodded again, quietly grateful. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes love isn't about the easy decisions. Sometimes it's about the hardest ones. The days I spent alone felt both endless and necessary. I kept going through the motions, work, walks, quiet dinners for one. But in the silence, I started hearing myself again. Not the Ethan who blindly trusted or the Ethan crushed by betrayal, but a version of me that was raw, honest, and painfully aware. Rachel and I met over coffee one afternoon, trying to talk without breaking. It was awkward and fragile, like we were trying to fit puzzle pieces that didn't quite match anymore. We spoke about what happened, about why, and what it meant for us. She didn't make excuses, she owned her mistakes, and I listened, really listened, even when it hurt. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting the imperfect truth of people we love. It was about setting boundaries and rebuilding trust slowly, brick by brick, if it was even possible. Some days I wanted to let go completely. The anger and disappointment felt like a shield, protecting me from more pain. Other days I saw glimpses of the woman I married, the woman who laughed with me over coffee, who held my hand during storms, who dreamed with me of a future. I didn't know where this path would lead, maybe back to each other or maybe apart, but what mattered was that I was choosing actively instead of drifting. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of hope. Not because the past was erased, but because maybe, just maybe, the future could be different, stronger, clearer, more honest. It wasn't an easy morning when Rachel and I sat down to talk again. We both knew this conversation would decide everything. Would we try to rebuild, or would we accept that some cracks are too deep? I looked into her eyes, the same eyes I'd fallen in love with, now softened by pain and regret. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger bubbling under the surface, just tiredness and a quiet kind of clarity. "We can't pretend this didn't happen," I said, "but maybe we can decide what happens next." She nodded, tears glistening. "I want to try. I want to be honest, really honest, no matter how hard it gets." That was all I needed to hear. We agreed on counseling, on honesty, on rebuilding trust with small steps. No quick fixes, no empty promises. It wouldn't be perfect. It wouldn't be easy. But it was real. The weeks that followed were filled with awkward conversations, hard truths, and moments of fragile connection. We stumbled, we faltered, but we also laughed. We remembered why we chose each other. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful again. Not because everything was back to the way it was, but because we were moving forward, together or apart, with eyes wide open. I realized that love isn't about never breaking. It's about how you pick up the pieces and decide what to build next. And for now, I was ready to build.